So this is Louis. It's a bit late, and I honestly need some Tylenol, and I've also been drinking, so I'm not in the greatest state of mind to be recording, but I actually felt the desire to record a lazy review, which is the trademark of my reviews, of episode 5 of Game of Thrones. So right up front, I'm going to inform you that there are spoilers in this commentary. So I'm going to put up a big spoiler tag. Spoilers. If you don't want to know the spoilers to this episode, do not listen to this commentary, because I'm going to spoil at least the part of this episode that I really liked. And the fact that I have a new queen, spelled with a K, in this show. And it's unfortunate because this is the second to last episode and the next is the last, so unfortunately the show's over, and I can already predict the ending. And I was predicting what happened in this episode, but when it actually happened, I was delighted by it. So, like I said, spoilers, okay? Now we're gonna move into it. This season has been largely bad. There's an incredible amount of emphasis by the directors on, or the producers even, I'm not even sure who's actually responsible for the direction of this season, but choreography appears to be, and visuals appear to be the big thing that they're going for with this season, because I think ever since the Battle of the Bastards, they've had like a bias for that, because I'm not sure whether it would be season 4 or 5 that it really started to go off the rails in terms of the quality. Probably 4 into 5, and by 5 you kind of noticed a drop. But 6 was not good, and 7 is also not good. 8 is kind of, in my view, the show has already climaxed. It really feels that way in a narrative kind of sense, because the feel of this season is just, okay, wrap it up. I can't begin to tell you how bad the pacing has been in this season. But for the sake of trying to highlight the positives, I'm not going to do what everyone else is going to do, which is dump all over the last few seasons of Game of Thrones, because yes, they have not been good. And this season it really isn't different. It includes this episode as well. They just gave up on the idea of actually trying to show something that would resemble historical accuracy in this fantasy setting. They have completely given up on that. The siege for King's Landing is just abysmal. It's a joke. For any of you out there that are like Middle Ages experts that care about siege warfare, this is another episode that makes that look like a joke. Like, they don't even bother. They're not even pretending to care, from their standpoint about accuracy. It's just a means to an end. Okay, of course, Dany has to siege, King's Landing, and so she does, and they, have very minimal urban combat, which I actually have to criticize this episode for. They should have spent far more time in this episode, even if you added a couple minutes more, like let's say 5 minutes, have Jon in King's Landing engaging in medieval urban warfare. Do that. Have something that is similar to the Battle of the Bastards, but in King's Landing where it's urban warfare, because I think that actually could have been both very visually impressive, but also very engaging in terms of audience retention. It would have been very interesting to watch that and see Jon struggle to fight in an urban environment, and his men and the enemy, the Lannister men, struggle to fight in an urban setting. The least interesting death in this episode, because a few people die, but the least interesting in my view is Cersei and Jaime, their assumed death in the catacombs of the Red Keep. That, in my view, was the least interesting deaths. I actually thought that it would be better off that they would escape, or something else would have occurred to where they would have been given a better send-off, because I can already predict what the last episode is going to be, what the events are going to be in that. And I have to say that, unfortunately, part of the reason they died in that setting is because of the writing from the past couple seasons. They have created the problem of, well, what do we now do with Cersei? What do we now do with Jaime? In my view, they kind of painted themselves into a corner. I believe even George R.R. Martin has criticized the show itself in terms of their writing. I'm not going to bother looking that up because I saw this floating around on Twitter that he actually criticized the show and said that what was happening in the show is not necessarily going to reflect the books, and he said it in a way that it stressed the idea that the approval of what was going on in the show wasn't there. Originally, I actually was on Team Cersei up until she hooked up with Iron Island's guy, who Jaime kills in this episode. I hated him. I absolutely hated his character, and not in the Bolton way, but just in the smarmy dickhead character who seems super overpowered. Like, he actually might be not a Mary Sue, but Gary Stu, whatever the male version is. Like, I would list him as being that, because he kills the former Iron Islands guy, who I actually like that actor a lot. He kills him just by, like, walking into him and throwing him off of a bridge. And I was like, to me, that was stupid and lazy. And it's like, okay, if you have to introduce the character, that's fine. But in the way that it was done, I really disliked it. And right from go, I hated that character because of that. Because I liked the character that he killed, and I hated his character, not in the Bolton way, but just in, you're just this generic bad guy who, if he didn't have 40 tons of plot armor, could be killed off like nothing because he's generic as shit. And the actor portraying him tries to come off as crazy and over the top and all this, but it's boring to me. I hated his character. And when he hooked up with Cersei, that started to turn me away from Cersei, because it's like, you're on the losing side. We can all see it. Everyone can see that this guy in his pathetic little navy is not going to save it for you. In my view, one of the reasons why they had Iron Island's guy kill another one of Dany's dragons was to puff him up. That was just bad writing to make him and his fleet and those ballistas look like they could be a real threat. And in this episode, it proves that when you have slow-moving siege weaponry against a fast-moving, living, breathing, fantasy monster, that unfortunately you can't anticipate the direction of a dragon. One of the good things I can say for the direction is that they actually show them trying to adjust. Like, oh, it's flying down here, adjust. Oh, it's up there, adjust. Like, they keep having to adjust, and they can't react fast enough to actually fire. And it was not great, but it at least gives you the reason why this time is different. When the last time Iron Island's guy went up against Dany, she lost a dragon. And she nearly lost her only remaining one as well in this one fight that happened, because the fleet showed up out of nowhere and just started attacking them with the ballistas, anchored on the ship. But in any case, like I said, is the writing good? No, it's not. A lot of this is done for the sake of wrapping things up and trying to do so in as flashy a way as possible. That would be how I would describe this season. We're finishing everything up. We're moving on to something else. We've already cemented ourselves in the industry as being top money makers, and this season is, I believe, is record setting for the entire show. So, everyone involved in this is going out on top, literally at the top of their careers. No matter how much we want to criticize the writing, everyone involved is going out with a bang, and everyone's going out with a ton of money under their arms. Like, they've looted King's Landing. They've looted George R.R. Martin, and they're running out, baby. The whole thing's burning. They're running out with, chests of gold underneath both arms when it comes to the show, because they have in some ways run it into the ground. But in any case, I want to talk about the new queen, the queen that knows the way. And I already know what's going to happen, but I don't care. I'm telling you right now that I am now on the side of Queen Dany Targaryen. She, for me, has been an insufferable character since the first episode that I saw her in. I have never liked her character. I have always viewed her as this fan fiction, girl power wank fest that I was unable to stand for several seasons, as she was across the world doing whatever, I fucking hated her character. I hated everything involved. It was nothing but a virtue signal. I couldn't stand it. And yet here I am. Here I am telling you that I am now on the side of, and unironically so, I am on the side of Queen Dany. I am Team Dany right now at this point, because my God, did this episode showcase her out Cerseiing Cersei. She went way further than any other character on the show has ever gone. No character in the show has ever done what she has done in this episode. And it harkens back, and I don't remember what episode this scene was, but there is an older season, and if for those of you that know the episode, shout it out in the comments section below. In a previous season, in a previous episode, there was a scene where she walks, it was where she was in some sort of like mystical tower for like magic types or illusionists that were trying to kidnap her dragons that were in a cage. She goes into this magic spire, and she's walking into an illusion, and as she walks in, it's King's Landing, the throne, and it's all destroyed, and it's covered in ash, or snow. I don't remember which, but I think it was ash. She walks around, and then she eventually kills the illusionist guy and gets out of there, but I thought about that episode, in this episode, when Dany beats Cersei's army, beats the Lannister army, and is sitting on a tower on her dragon. She's sitting there, she's looking around, and I thought about that episode, and I said, you know what? This is going to happen. She's going to go all the way. She is going to become a villain. And it's going to be not just a villain, but the most villainous character in the show. So I'm going to switch to this picture with Arya as a showcase. And I can't show any video because HBO is ridiculous when it comes to copyright. But you are given a clear first-person view of all the damage Dany inflicts. And she kills, very likely, thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of people to such a point that Jon has to pull back his forces. Like, they all start to retreat. One, because his forces are totally out of control. The allied forces for Dany are totally out of control. They're killing innocents, they're raping women, they're going crazy. And Jon is trying to stop them, but ultimately, it's the fact that Dany is getting so danger close with her dragon and just destroying the entire fucking city that they just pull back and they flee. I watched that destruction, and I watched the amount of people that she kills, and I said, you know what? This is not a Mary Sue character anymore. Dany is no longer fan fiction, fan wank, bullshit Mary Sue. She is now the queen. She knows the way. And despite everything that's wrong with this season, despite everything that's wrong with this show, they have taken a character that I have hated since the beginning, since they introduced her, and they have made me a fan. I am now on Team Dany. I am on her side. And I have to say that I already know what's going to happen because of this. I already know that everyone's going to turn against her. This is so predictable because of what she did. Because what happened was, in this episode, because of her actions, they're able to easily siege the city. The city surrenders. The Lannister army surrenders. They throw down their swords, at least the front line does. And in a tense moment, they eventually ring the bells of the city, signaling that the Lannister army has surrendered and that the city has been successfully taken by Dany's forces. Although it's kind of weird to me that it actually hadn't been taken, because the ensuing, 20 minutes of fighting, that showcases to you that the city wasn't actually taken. It was just in a fight that they had no chance at winning. Because with the dragon, just one dragon, Dany was able to annihilate nearly all of the city defenses. They don't actually show what happens to the archers. which is a little bit of an oversight. But in terms of the ballistas, they show that, and the gates, they show that. So for at least some of the defenses, they show how Dany defeats them in a single swoop. What I didn't appreciate was the fact that as she was, like, burning them, they weren't even, like, fleeing or turning the ballistas or anything. They were just getting burned. So that was, again, not great direction. But even still, even with all the flaws of this episode, I have to say that it's unfortunate that we are not going to get the opportunity to bend the knee to Queen Dany, because I'm ready to do it. I'm ready to bend that knee. I'm ready to name her the monarch of the Seven Kingdoms. I'm ready to do it. But everyone else, they're going to have all sorts of moral concerns over what Dany did. But I have to say, as far as I know, the Targaryens, they built the Red Keep. So if we're being fair, how is it not in Dany's purview? How is it not within her authority to raise the city? How is that not something that isn't within her authority to do as a Targaryen? There are rules in place in terms of this setting. There are rules in place in terms of lineage. And I have to say that, if, whichever nobility survives this massacre, you have to question whether or not she actually has the authority to do what she did. There is a question to it. I mean, Cersei can apparently blow up the, the sept, the sept for the seven gods, whatever the actual faith is called. She can blow that up and apparently no one cares. She can declare herself queen, despite the fact that in this setting you have to be a male to be king, to be the monarch. There is no queens in this setting, and yet no one addresses that. There's no questioning of that in this show. But her raising a city, I'm just saying, if Cersei can declare herself queen, and that's fine, why can't Dany raise a city? One that her family built. Her house built that city. How is it something that is outside the realm of her lineage to have some authority over what is done with this city that is now hers? They have bent the knee. They have conceded. They surrendered. But that doesn't mean that she doesn't have the right to raise the city. I'm just saying that there's rules. And, people need to understand that regardless of the moral implications of what was done, that there is a serious question of whether she had, by right, the authority to do what she did. Everyone's going to get their hackles up and say, oh, this was a massacre, Louis. This is unjustifiable, Louis. Potentially tens of thousands of innocents died, Louis. I'm just saying that in terms of this setting, there are rules. There's canon, okay? There's lore. And we need to look at that lore. This show used to care about it at one point. It was the basis of the first season, was heritage and lore and that sort of thing. And all I'm saying is, let's crack open some books. Go down to the Citadel, okay? Let's crack some books. Let's find out whether or not Dany had the ability to raise that city, by right or not. Let's find that out. There might be some justification historically in the show for it. You gotta look to know, okay? As I watched this show, I had intense nostalgia for, Infamous 2? Deslin Rowe? The villainous version of that character. I had flashbacks to playing that game. And I like that game. And I like playing as the so-called evil character in that game. It reminded me of that game, and so I watched this episode, and I enjoyed it. This is the best episode of any episode for this season so far, in my view. Certainly, cinematically, in terms of the cinematography, the visuals, they were fantastic. I'm sure everyone loved the whole zombie scenes in that one episode, but I would say, put them side by side, this episode was better, even with the shitty siege. For anyone that's a conscientious objector, you can feel free to raise your hand. I'm sure it will be noted at this point. But To me, what I'm waiting for is get rid of the Unsullied. That's another part of I know some people like the Unsullied. I don't like the Unsullied. Screw the Unsullied. We need a Targaryen house with their own army that aren't frickin' Unsullied or the horsemen, okay? We need a proper house army, militia, whatever, for Dany. We need it. It needs to happen. There's only one episode left. Unfortunately, it's not going to happen. But that's what I want. That's my demand for the final episode. Is that Dany wins. I don't care who else dies. I don't care at this point. Dany wins. And we're starting over from square one. And Dany's now the monarch. She's now in charge. If they're planning on a season 9, the two idiots that wrote this and have been doing the commentary afterwards that people have been making fun of on Twitter, those guys, I don't know your names. I'm just saying, I don't have an English accent. Put me in that show. Put me in a sex scene with Dany, that actress. I don't know. I can't remember her name. Put me in there. I am ready. You're thinking to yourselves, who is going to defend this woman and her actions? I am ready. I am ready to do it. I am ready to make the case. I'll bend the knee. Put me in a slot in that show, and I will make the moral case in her defense. I will do it. I have that ability. I am persuasive. I have charisma. At least some. Put me in the show, goddammit, and I will defend the Queen against all her enemies and the conscientious objectors to her tactics. When, like I said, crack a book and let's see whether or not it's justified. We don't know. You can have all your moral obscurantism. You're the obscurance, okay? I'm the one that's calling it like it is. Where there might actually be a defense for what she did in the lore, okay? You're the one that's sitting there saying like, I have these moral objections. There's so many moral implications to all these people that died. Well, it was her city. It was a Targaryen city. It's technically her hold. She's not allowed to raise her own hold for her own lineage, for her own house. I don't know. That's all I'm saying is I don't know. You're the one that's coming in with these absolutist arguments based on moral posturing. That's what you're doing. I actually think that there might be a defense for this. We just need to look. We just need to find this out. Let's start an investigation. And let's find out one way or the other whether this was justified or not. And anyone who's a conscientious objector, raise your hand. Anyways, so yeah, I liked this episode. This was really funny to me because this character, for a lot of like SJWs who watch this show, they really liked her character. She wasn't Mary Sue. She wasn't the only one, by the way. But I think that she has now lost that title. I think that has been taken away from her by the showrunners, the people running this. I think they took her symbol of white savior and they completely crashed it against the ground. And I'm fine with that. I am all for that. Anyways, I'll leave it there. And feel free to say what you think in the comment section. Yeah, all hail the Queen. That's how I'll end this. All right, thanks.